Okay, all right. So yeah, the sleepers of Ephesus and Zulkarnain both appear, right next to each other in that one particular surah. So just for my knowledge, and maybe for anybody else who may not know the answer, where did the story of the sleepers of Ephesus come from? I mean, it's not in the canon of the Bible, but is there any one particular book where it's a non-canonical book where it's available, or is it just oral traditions that were up in the air?
Yeah, this one we know of from a written documentary source. Boy, we could have a whole session just on the sleepers of the Ephesus and the Quran's interest in this story. So as you note, in the Christian context in the Middle East, probably beginning in the 5th century, but I believe our earliest version of it comes from the 6th century and is from the scholar I just mentioned, the Syriac scholar Jacob of Sarug, who wrote a homily on a story which is known as the Seven Sleepers, or the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus, or the Sleepers of Ephesus. It was a very popular story that has a rich manuscript tradition in Syriac and had all sorts of echoes in the Christian world, as it did eventually in the Islamic world as well. The principal point of the story, although you don't really ask this, but I'm tempted to say one or two things. The principal point of the story is that not only the soul is eternal, but also the body will be resurrected or raised. And this was a debate that had gone on, as it would go on also in certain Islamic circles, that had gone on in certain Christian circles in late antiquity. There are certain groups of Christians associated with the early church father Origen, who apparently, at least according to their enemies, denied the resurrection of the body. And the story is meant to respond to them. I could say more about the Christian story, but yeah, its most popular form is from Jacob of Sarug. One really interesting thing about the story is that we have different variations of how many sleepers, how many companions, ashab, there were in the Christian context. Some say 7, some say 8, even though the famous one is 7. And then we see the Qur'an is actually concerned not only with the story, but with debates about the story. Because at the end of the passage on the sleepers, it says, oh, don't argue. Some say this, some say that. Don't argue about how many companions there were.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And and you said that quite succinctly. Yeah, the Quran does say, don't argue about the number of sleepers that there were. And just once again, for my knowledge, Gabriel, can you tell us if was the dog mentioned as well in that original story of John's? In the, I mean,
So great. So the dog is not mentioned in Jacob's version of the sleepers account. He speaks of a watcher. And the Syriac word will come to me before the end of our session, probably, hopefully. But he speaks of a watcher, which seems to be an allusion to an angel. But keep this in mind. The language that Jacob uses to speak about the sleepers and their enemy is all wrapped up in metaphorical language around shepherding and guarding sheep. So the young men, the sleepers, are referred to as sheep. Christ is referred to as the good shepherd, and the enemy, who's the pagan king, is referred to as a wolf. And then we find the word watcher. And so it seems like an obvious next step to interpret the watcher who's guarding the sheep from the wolf as a dog.
Well, thank you for that. And I'll digress a little bit, and I'll tell you why I asked about the dog. The reason being that, unfortunately, in a lot of Muslim communities, and Bangladesh is no exception, there is this notion that dogs are basically unholy, and so you shouldn't have dogs in the house or as pets, etc. So the sleepers of the cave and the dog is always my go-to story whenever I want to give a counter argument to people, because my wife and I, we're part of a lot of animal welfare associations. So we try our best to try and change the negative perception about dogs, and say to people that, what, if God Almighty himself, as per what you believe, felt that the dogs were unholy, he probably wouldn't have tried mentioning it in the first place in the Quran. Because if this wasn't in the original story of the sleepers of Ephesus, why have it in the Quran in the first place? It doesn't serve any purpose except to say that, there is something very positive about the dog.